Hello, and welcome to the second ever installment of the DracCast, the official podcast of Dracula Core and Edgy Shitposting about comics. I'm your host, of course, the admin of both of those pages, and today we're going to be talking about an actual vampire movie. You'd think I would have started the podcast with a vampire movie. Nope. I decided to be extra, a little weird and quirky, and start with a movie that had nothing to do with vampires. But this is a vampire movie, and boy howdy, am I excited to talk about this, because today we're doing The Lost Boys. This is a movie that I really like. This is not my introduction to vampires, but it basically is. I remember being a little kid, and I'm walking through Blockbuster Video with my mom, and I see a copy of this movie on the shelf, and I was in a play production. I was doing a theater production of Peter Pan at the time as a little kid, and I was like, hey, look, it's The Lost Boys, because Peter Pan. And my mom kind of laughed and said, oh, no, that's a different thing. And I went, really? And she said, yeah, it's named after The Lost Boys, but it's a different thing. It's about vampires. And I went, it's about vampires? And she said, yeah, no, you'll like it a lot when you're older. And I'm older and I like it a lot. And it was actually my mom who showed this to me. I mentioned to her that I, on the phone with her, and I mentioned that that I was doing this movie, and she was like, "Oh, I read the novelization of that film when it came out," and I was shocked, not shocked, but I just thought that was funny because my mom is not really into this kind of stuff. My mom's not a vampire person at all. She's barely into like nerd stuff in general, although she likes some of it, don't get me wrong. She's my mom. I'm not going to come out of nowhere. It's very much a little bit of a nurture, a little bit of nature for me. But my parents aren't horror people. But this is a movie she loves, and so this is the episode. Shout out to my mom because she showed me this movie. Anyway, really quickly, also, I should note that unlike with Darkman, I actually am going to spoil this film. So heads up about that. If you really don't want this spoiled for you, might not want to listen to this episode. That being said, even if you haven't seen this film, which I think most people who listen to this probably have, because if you're a fan of my content, you've probably seen this movie because it's a very famous, successful film. And if you're just like on YouTube looking for Lost Boys content, this is a video about the Lost Boys. So you've probably seen the movie already. That being said, also, if you haven't seen the movie, I do suggest it. But feel free to listen anyway, because I don't think this is it's not a movie that you can't have spoiled for you going into it. Although it does have a crazy ending, and I'll get into that as we talk about it. So, I've seen this movie multiple times. I rewatched it yesterday, just in preparation for this, and I noticed a lot of little fun details about this film, and so I figured I'd kind of just do like a little bit more of a beat-by-beat walkthrough of what happens in the movie, but specifically focusing on the stuff that I think is cool that I noticed this time around. So this is a film really about, this is like, I think, probably the first teenage vampire movie I can think of. I don't think there were any teenage vampire movies before this. There's teenagers in vampire movies, don't get me wrong. And like young adults, obviously. Like there's a bunch of the 70s and like the 60s and 70s Dracula movies. The Hammer ones tend to have like young, hot adults, dealing with like crazy vampire shit. I should talk about those at some point. They're crazy as they go on. But this is, I think, the first like teen vampire movie I can think of. Not a teenage. This isn't a kids movie by any stretch. This is an R-rated film. But this is a movie about teenagers who are all played by adults. But they're supposed to be like, the main character Michael is supposed to be 18. And I think that's kind of a good gauge of who this movie is sort of aimed at. This is aimed at young adults and teens. And honestly, people younger than that, because there are characters who are like kids in this movie too, who are arguably kind of more the protagonists. It's kind of like Stranger Things, I guess, where there's the teen characters and the child characters. Although by this point, as that show has gone on, they're just all adults now. Anyway, so The Lost Boys is a movie about two brothers who move to a town with their mom. And the town is called Santa Carla. And it is supposed to be the murder capital. It's the murder capital of, I think, the world, they say. They move in with their grandpa, who's like a funny old man, and is probably the best part of this movie, even though he's not in it much. But the grandpa, he's an eccentric man. He's a little bit rough and tumble, but he's also like rough and tumble in a funny way. One of the first things he does is they get there and he's like, "All right, boys, listen. This here's my fridge. This second shelf here is where I keep my root beer." And he's got so much root beer. And he's like, this root beer here, this is where I keep my root beer. No one touch any of my root beer on the second shelf. You guys get the other shelves, but this one's for my root beer. And already you're like, okay, this guy's awesome. I love this dude. So they live there, and they're with their mom, obviously, and their parents have divorced, and the mom has custody. And even though it's the murder capital of the world, this is not a safe-seeming community. There's parties constantly at night on the boardwalk. There's like a sexy, shirtless saxophone-playing man who, if you haven't seen this movie, you've probably seen that guy. He's iconic. And there's like games, and there's an arcade. There's like a Ferris wheel. It's crazy, and it doesn't seem to just be the kids out either. Like the adults are also out doing all this, which is, it looks like a fun community. But no wonder people get murdered so much. They don't seem like they're being very safe regarding that. But that's not important. Because the movie's awesome, and we don't need to take issue with that. And it also kind of seems like the sense we get is that everyone in the town knows it's the murder capital, but they just want to ignore that fact, which that's not unrealistic. I could see something like that being the case. So early on, we meet the titular characters, the Lost Boys, and the Lost Boys are great. They are a vampire biker gang, which seems so kind of obvious to do as a thing, but I can't think of any prior examples that just off the top of my head. I'm sure they exist, and I'm sure one will come to me, but it's such a good concept. But we meet them. Their leader is David. He is played by a very blonde young Kiefer Sutherland, who looks so sick in this movie. He's got like bleach blonde mullet. He wears like a long black trench coat. He's got like earrings. He's got leather gloves. This is basically who I wish I looked like. This guy looks so badass. And he's got like his gang, and they're very like, you don't get a lot with these guys. You don't get their backstory or anything, but you feel they're all very cool, iconic characters. Obviously, like, that character is iconic and has spawned a million imitators. I assume Spike from Buffy is in some, whether intentional way or not, inspired by David. David's girlfriend is Star, who's a classic kind of like biker chick, or like not biker chick, girl in a biker gang, who's kind of just like the girlfriend of the leader and doesn't seem to have a lot of agency. She's a major part of this film. And then there's a group of others as well. There's Marco, who's played by Alex Winter. There's a guy named Paul. There's a guy named Dwayne. I had to look these up because other than David and Star, I don't remember them really saying their names. And they go around at night and eat people and fuck around. Like, they don't seem to have an evil goal. They're not trying to take over the world or even the town. They just go around killing people at night and like shooting the shit. They just have a fun crazy guy time. Like the tagline for this film was "Sleep all day, party all night," and these guys definitely party. Not a party I'd want to be invited to if I'm a human, but if I'm a vampire, then this seems like a pretty sick party. So one of the other things we do early in the film is we establish the other sort of element of this film, which is comic books, which is awesome. I love that this film is about comics, kind of. It's kind of a comic book adjacent film because we are introduced to two characters named the Frog Brothers. The Frog Brothers are another really iconic part of this movie. They are played by Corey Feldman and Jameson Newlander. I don't know what else Jameson Newlander is in, but Corey Feldman, obviously, the Feld dog is a big star, or was. He's gone a little off the deep end. If you're familiar with Angelic to the Core, which is his album he made, Corey's a little off. I try not to be too dismissive or like mocking of him. Not that I don't think that, like, I do think that Angelic to the Core, that album is like very funny. But Corey Feldman is, if you look into it, like clearly a very traumatized, very kind of like sad Hollywood child star story, and like seems to not want people to make fun of him, and I feel kind of bad for him at points. I'm not trying to like shame other people for finding him funny, because I also think that Angelic to the Core is very funny. You should, if you haven't, do look up the Angelic to the Core stuff, especially look up the music video to Go For It by Corey Feldman and Snoop Dogg. Oh my God. And Ascension Millennium is the other one that's really good. It's like, you know, it's so bad it's good music, and again, I don't think there's anything wrong with laughing at it. But yeah, the guy who made that is in this movie, and he's obviously in a bunch of other stuff. He's a huge star in the 80s, and he's good. The Feldman is great in this movie. They're both of the Frog Brothers are awesome in this, and they're two young comic book fans who they just work at a comic book store, and there's some great moments because it feels like the people who made this movie either are comic book fans or just looked into it, because there's a bit where they're talking about organizing Superman comics, and they're like, well, you can't put the 130, the Action Comics 130 with the Action Comics 157. They haven't even discovered red kryptonite yet. And you can't put the 200s with the 300s because Lori Lamaris hasn't even shown up yet. And I don't know if those numbers are accurate, but I think it's cool that they reference red kryptonite and Lori Lamaris, which are kind of deep cut things, at least for Superman. So that's fun. And I should note, of course, the guy who directed this movie went on to make, Joel Schumacher went on to make Batman and Robin and Batman Forever, the two later Batman movies of that era. He's a good filmmaker despite that. I mean, if this isn't enough, he made a bunch of other movies that are just iconic kind of Hollywood films. Even after Batman and Robin, he did Phantom of the Opera, the film version of Phantom of the Opera. The one, I say that, I mean, there's a million films of Phantom of the Opera, specifically the one based on the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Yeah, no, I mean, he's just, Joel Schumacher was a legend. Rest in peace, by the way, he died a couple years ago. Schumacher was just legendary guy. Claimed that he had, I want to find the number here, just because it's really funny. Schumacher claimed that he had sex with between 10,000 and 20,000 men over the course of his life. And man, I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's really funny if it is, and I want to believe, if you know what I mean. But yeah, no, he died in 2020, not of COVID. He had cancer. He was old. A real tragedy. I love Joel Schumacher. He was still working pretty late into his life as well. But other movies he directed, just off the top, in case you don't know, he directed St. Elmo's Fire. He directed the movie The Client. He directed some of House of Cards, the American House of Cards. Yeah, I mean, he just did a bunch of stuff like that. He made the movie Car Wash. The Wiz. Just an absolute legend of cinema, of Hollywood film. I mean, he's not like, they probably don't study Joel Schumacher in film school, but in terms of Hollywood blockbusters, he's a really fun guy. And I think he could have made good Batman movies if they'd let him. Because for those who don't know, they very much told him that he couldn't. It had to be toyetic. It had to be for, like, babies. That's kind of why those movies are as weird as they are. I think Schumacher would have made something a little bit more akin to the most recent Batman we've had. I've actually heard people make that exact point, that the Batman feels like the movie Schumacher would have made if he could have. Which I think is probably true, having watched other films by him. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because Joel Schumacher's a legend, and I don't think he gets talked about enough. But so what ends up happening is that one of our leads, because this is a movie that has kind of two main characters, Michael ends up meeting a girl from the vampire gang named Star. And unfortunately, we don't get backstories for really any of the vampire kids, but she mentions that her name's Star, and he says, "Oh yeah, like my parents were hippies back in the day. I bet yours were too, just because her name's Star." He's like, "Yeah, my name was almost like Moonbeam or something." And I'm wondering, like, I don't know. I'm sure there's someone has explained this. Maybe it's in the screenplay. I don't know. But I'm wondering if, like, the implication is that Star is in fact from the 60s. Like, if she's been a vampire since then. I don't know if that's canon. That's always how I've read it. And I think I think that's a cool concept. But yeah, so Star and him are clearly interested in each other. They do end up porking. And he ends up getting turned into a vampire. And, well, so that's important. He is kind of a vampire. There's a bit where he walks by a mirror, and Sam, the younger brother, says, look at the mirror. And they do a cool thing where, like, he's half visible in the mirror and half not. He's sort of fading in and out, and with the implication being that he's in the transitional stage of becoming a vampire. They specifically refer to him as a half vampire, because he's like phasing in and out on the mirror, and he seems to have some vampiric stuff that's normal and some that isn't. And they mention at this point that, like, at this point they can still basically save him. They think the Frog Brothers are very insistent on killing him, because the Frog Brothers seem explicitly like they read a lot of horror comics, because they seem to be, like, obsessed with vampires. This is, like, maybe the first example I can think of in pop culture, and one of the only, where the nerd kid characters, this is very 80s, are actually presented as kind of badass. They're a little bit off and funny, but, I mean, these kids are the ones who save the day, obviously, and, like, no one ever really makes fun of them for being, like, nerds. There's none of that. They're kids. That's part of it, but, like, the sort of ostensible message of this film is, hey, you should read more comics because it might help you kill vampires. And this movie plays with vampire mythology a lot, and I will talk about that a little bit more later. But their whole thing is they're really insistent. Like, your brother's a vampire, you have to kill him. You have to stake him. He's a vampire. Kill him. And Sam's like, I don't want to kill my brother. He might be a vampire, but he's my brother. And so they basically figure out that at this point, if they kill what they call the head vampire, they can save Michael's life. And, well, they can save his life and not his unlife, because he'll just become a human again if they kill the head vampire. And they don't know who the head vampire is. And the mom has started dating a video store owner whose name is Max. And Max is, like, just sort of a nerdy, but, like, nice, like he seems like a good guy. So the mom and him start going out. They're convinced he's the head vampire. And so they try to, like, figure it out. They give him garlic. They spill water on him. And none of it, I mean, it annoys him, but he doesn't, like, die. And so they're like, okay, I guess we were wrong. Like, I really like, there's a bit where, because they're eating pasta, and Sam says, hey, you want some Parmesan on your pasta? Well, you're like spaghetti? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he grates it, and then he bites it, and he was grating garlic. He's like, oh, it's garlic. It's garlic. And Sam says, yeah, I bet you hate garlic, don't you? And he goes, no, I like garlic. There's just too much of it. And it's like, yeah, okay. If I ate too much garlic, I would also not like it. That's a thing I like about it. There's a little kid with the vampires as well. And we see early in the film that it's very 80s. His face is on the milk carton, which was a very 80s thing to do. And that's another thing that's sort of setting up, like, not everyone who's in the vampire gang kind of wants to be there or didn't initially want to be there. Because the kid is also a vampire. And so anyway, they keep like looking around, and Michael is becoming more and more. He's hanging out more and more with the vampires, and he's hanging out with them. They live in a cave, and the cave is specifically noted to basically be one big coffin. And I really liked that the notion of, like, the vampires don't sleep in individual coffins; they sleep in almost like a hive pile in like a cave. I thought that was a really cool idea, and just the notion of, like, in like a modern day, in like urban-ish sort of environment, like a city, there's just a cave full of vampires somewhere. I think that's so sick, especially in like California, where there's like a lot of beaches and stuff. I mean, I've never been to California, but I assume that there's a lot of like woods and beach areas that don't have a lot of people in them. So I think that having vampires living there is really cool. The kids figure out, they're like, well, we think that the bikers, for one thing, are the vampires. But they also kind of figure out that David, the Kiefer Sutherland character, is the head vampire. And there ends up being this giant fight in their house where it's the vampires versus the kids. And Michael, specifically, who is a vampire, is fighting the other vampires at this point as well. And there's an obvious element of, like, he's also fucking the biker gang leader's girlfriend. So it's also just a regular fight a little bit too. And anyway, they end up killing the vampires in like very creative ways. I should know they do a good job with it. I think that it's a very cool take on like how you kill vampires and stuff. There's a lot of creativity to how they do that. But they do end up like killing Kiefer Sutherland's character. They impale him actually on antlers, like deer antlers, which I think is such a cool idea, because it's how you kill like what can kill a vampire is constantly changing, and I think that the idea that just kind of like impaling them through the heart on like any hard thing can kill them. That's fine. But anyway, Michael doesn't turn back, and they're like, wait, he's not the head vampire. Who shows up but Max? Max really was the head vampire, and he has been trying to get the mom to be kind of his like bride of Dracula, ostensibly. And it's foreshadowed really well, because she's talking about how her sons are being so silly and crazy right now. And she doesn't know what to do, and he says, well, with kids that age, you need to discipline them. Kids really need a mother, or they'll drive you crazy. And she says, well, they're not driving me crazy. I love my kids. Like, she's clearly a more hands-off kind of, she's not a very stern or strict parent. Her kids go out partying all night, obviously. So she's not, and her son's a vampire, and she doesn't notice. Like, she's not a very strict mom. And then when he comes back later, he's like, well, I'd hope this wasn't how we'd have to do this, but yeah, I'm trying to turn you into a vampire, Lucy. That's the mom's name, is Lucy. Because my boys need a mother. And I think Max is such a good villain. I think he's so cool. Just for the little bit we get of him as a vampire, he is so well done. And then anyway, just as he's about to like attack them, the grandpa shows up in this sick, like fucking, like kind of like redneck vampire hunting car that shoots wooden stakes, and he kills Max and gets out of the. It's like a truck. I said car. It's like a truck. Gets out of the truck, goes to the fridge, opens it up, cracks open a bottle of root beer, takes a sip, and goes, "That's the problem with Santa Carla, was all the damn vampires." End of movie. And as a kid, I was like, yo, grandpa's a vampire hunter. And it's so sick when you see it. Because there's no implication prior to that he's anything other than just a silly, like, eccentric old man. But it's suddenly, like, there's so much potential here. And that's the thing I do also want to talk about. This is a movie that I think has a lot of potential that's never really explored. There are 2 sequels to this film. I have not watched them. They're directed video, and they don't have most of the original cast. I'm not super interested. I might check them out at some point. Like Darkman, I may do like a video that's just, or I might do an episode that's just like sequels to movies I've already talked about that don't need their own episode. So I might check those out, but no promises here. I'm less interested in them than I am the Darkman sequels. Yeah, I mean, this should have, I think, been more of a thing. And it was, from what I can tell, originally they were going to do more like direct sequels, but franchises just weren't a thing like they are now in the 80s. We weren't building a cinematic universe out of everything, which I kind of like, to be fair. I kind of like that about 80s movies. But this is one where it feels like there's so much to do, so much potential. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because there's so much that's unanswered, so many unanswered questions here. How do these kids become vampires? How is Max, what does it mean to be the head vampire? Because ostensibly, when the head vampire dies, the other vampires stop being vampires, which implies to me that it's not just a social thing. There is something biologically special about the head vampire. Whether it's like not that it would necessarily be like a different species, but it could be like how, only certain lions grow manes, only certain, orangutans get the what's it called, like the flange or whatever, the big flat cool thing that they get. The orangutan face that they get. Like queen bees, like it feels like there's some sort of subtype, some sort of like, I don't know what like biosocial, I don't know if that's a word, but that's like the one that I think of. So there's some sort of element of specialness biologically to the head vampire. And the question is, are they a head vampire before they infect people? Do you have to infect enough people to become a head vampire? Or do they start as head vampires before they infect people? Because clearly biting someone doesn't make you a head vampire. It's not hierarchical in a traditional sense, it seems. None of this is answered in the film. None of it needs to be answered in the film, to be honest with you. This film gives you just enough vampire lore to work, and it doesn't need any more. But it would be cool if there was more explained outside of this in the expanded universe sort of stuff, an EU, if you will. And I know that the novelization, which apparently my mom read, does give you more of that stuff, like more lore, vampire lore stuff, which is cool. And I think that's like one of the fun things about those novelizations is they generally give the novelizations to the people who write the novelizations. They generally give them like a version of the script that is often a little bit different than the one that gets filmed. And so sometimes those novelizations have stuff in them that's just not in the film, whether it's just straight up added by the writer or if it's just like a thing in the script that's not made apparent in the film, because the novel writer, the novelization writer, hasn't seen the movie usually, especially if they're putting it out around the same time. I think my mom mentioned that the book was out first, which is also not uncommon. So that, that's one of the cool things about those novelizations. Not that I read them, because I don't, because they're not usually very good, but that's a cool thing. I did when I was younger, too. I had a novelization of, like, like the directed TV, like the directed, the made-for-TV live-action Ben 10 Alien Force movie. God, I don't remember anything about it. I just remember that I had the novelization of that and that I did read the whole thing for some reason. As a little kid, I read whatever I get my hands on. Other things about this movie that I think are really interesting, because I read sort of a claim online again that this is a film that sort of defined the late 20th century vampire, the vampire basically up until probably actually the early 2000s, really up till Twilight, probably. You can see echoes of these vampires, I think, obviously in something like Buffy. That's the most obvious one, just visually more than anything else. Because when the vampires sort of reveal themselves, they get the big scrunched up head with the red eyes that we get in Buffy. And I thought Buffy was the thing that originated that. But no, it actually seems to be this, from what I can tell, because I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, it does seem to be this. And as far as I can remember, I've always thought that was a cool idea. And they do it well in this. It doesn't look exactly like the ones from Buffy. They look a little bit different, but I think it's a really cool idea, a really cool take. And it lets you do scary monster vampire and also looks like a guy and is sexy, but also can blend in vampire. You basically get Nosferatu and Dracula in one movie, like Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee Dracula, like regular looking guy in the same movie. I think the first thing to do that might be the movie Blackula, because when Blackula vamps out, his face changes a little bit, not in the same way, but he gets like weird facial hair and big eyebrows and stuff. So I think that might actually be it. I don't know. I'd really have to look at it, and it also it depends on how you define it, because there's moments in the Christopher Lee ones where he also kind of goes, but that's different because he's not really physically. Whatever, that's not important. But it's just worth noting, because I think it's an interesting kind of trope of vampires that we do now, that this seems to have popularized. But yeah, you can see echoes of these vampires even in like Blade a little bit, just in the kind of like the fact that they all wear like leather and they're kind of punky and horny. That's in the Blade vampires as well. You can see echoes of these guys in the Twilight vampires. I've seen people point out that this movie and Twilight have the same basic premise pretty well, in that it's a kind of coven of teenage vampires and a creepy old man who turned them all into vampires. Twilight plays it as that's like a cool guy and that's like a cool community, and in this it's a lot more like gross and weird and predatory, not in a sexual way, but it feels like Max is building a family is how he's looking at it. The film, Max is an insane person, clearly. Because they really are like the Lost Boys. They're a dark version of a found family. And Max, in that he wants a mother for the group, is sort of similar both to Peter Pan but also to Captain Hook. And I think that's really cool. I remember as a kid, I think I wrote a short story for my English class in 7th grade about vampire Peter Pan. That was, I think, called Peter Panpire, because I thought it was really funny. And it was like, I forgot about it until right now. This is all coming back to me now. Yeah, I wrote a short story called Peter Panpire, about a vampire Peter Pan, and it starred a character who I'd created, whose name I don't remember, he was supposed to be like a literary detective. This is a fun, you know what, I was in 7th grade, but I'm happy that I did this. He was like a metatextual detective, and he would go into like different stories, and he would solve a mystery in them. So the other story I wrote with him was he was in the land of Oz, and he was trying to figure out who killed the Wicked Witch of the East. So he was doing a murder investigation to find Dorothy. I don't have these at all. I have no copies of these. I think it's actually kind of cool. I'm sure someone else has done something like it, but as just a thing I wrote as a kid, I'm happy I came up with that. That's a fun idea. But yeah, it just works. Peter Pan doesn't age. Vampires don't age. It feels right, and I'm surprised it actually kind of took us this long to get to that notion. A little bit more about the vampires in this movie. Like I mentioned, they all sleep in one sort of coffin. It seems like this movie is actually surprisingly faithful to sort of OG classic Dracula-esque vampire stuff. I mean, they bring in the water weakness. They at least try the garlic one. The water one actually seems to work to an extent, though, as a weakness. Obviously, stake through the heart. They don't like sunlight. We don't ever really see them go out in the sun, so presumably they're not fond of it. Michael wears sunglasses at night, so he can. Obviously, they don't show up in mirrors. They fly, which is a thing we always leave out. But yeah, these guys fly, and the way they do it, it's very Sam Raimi. We just kind of see it through their eyes as they kind of float around and eat people. It's really cool. I like these vampires a lot, and yeah, I think it's a well done take, and I like the vampire deaths. They're all sort of different and unique and cool, and I think that's a fun way of doing vampire deaths. They all kind of die differently. Yeah, and just something about, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, the idea of vampire bikers, which are also in Vampire the Masquerade, and it's spin-off material as well. They have the Bruja, who are essentially the Bruja are vampire bikers who are seemingly just based on the Lost Boys, as far as I can tell. I have seen speculation that they're Sabbat. I don't know enough about Vampire to care. I never really played Vampire the Masquerade because I'm not a complete nerd. I'm not a big nerd. I play cool shit like Pathfinder. No, I don't know. No hate on that. It's a good franchise. It's not a thing I ever really got into. I do own Bloodlines, the video game, and I thought it was kind of cool. I never beat it, but I thought it was kind of neat. And I like the Cain thing as an origin for vampires. So obviously they're an inspiration on that, and that's one of the main things I think that draws from this. But the idea of a vampire biker gang, I remember as a kid thinking it didn't make a lot of sense. I always thought that werewolves would be better as a biker gang, or a pack, or as an organized crime family of werewolves. That was a thing I thought was a cool concept. I've since seen it in the things, but I don't know, something I think about giving vampires almost like a pack structure, a clan structure. There's something cool about that too. It's not in original sort of OG vampire myth in the sense, but Dracula kind of has a clan, right? He's got his brides. He's got Renfield. He's kind of seemingly trying to turn the other characters into part of it. So Dracula is sort of a head vampire in a sense, which led to a thing I thought about during the movie, which is that the grandpa is sort of as a vampire hunter. You could headcanon that this guy is somehow connected to Van Helsing, whether it's direct. I mean, I don't think he is of Van Helsing, but you could easily headcanon that this guy is somehow inspired by Van Helsing or a disciple of Van Helsing. I mean, there's a lot to speculate on with these kinds of movies and to draw connections between different vampire films, which is obviously what Kim Newman did in his book Anno Dracula, that series, which I'm going to do an episode on at some point, because I think a lot of people who follow me don't know that series, which is a shame because it's cool. So yeah, you know what? I'm gonna do something on that for sure. That's a definite on the to-do list. But yeah, I thought of that watching this, and one of the things that I thought about is how, so obviously we get 2 sequels to this. There are also comics, which I haven't read, but I did look them up. So there's 2 comics series. There's a 4-issue Wildstorm series called Lost Boy Reign of Frogs, which is set right before the Lost Boys, the Tribe, and is about the Frog Brothers as they're getting older, as they're young adults and adults. Seemingly, it seems like it's kind of on a bigger scale. They're like going around the country. It seems like it could be kind of fun. I might check that out. And the other one, which I also would probably check out, is called just The Lost Boys. It was a book Vertigo did. It was only 6 issues, but that was also a kind of follow-up, but is a more direct sequel, and it's actually it's called The Lost Girls, and apparently that was the title of the unmade sequel that Joel Schumacher came up with. And I don't know much about the details of that film in particular, although it presumably would have been about a girl biker, like vampire biker girls. And that's such a cool idea, just to give them a sort of a female sort of gender bent counterpart. And I think that, I don't know, vampire biker babe is such a sick concept for like a character that, yeah, I mean, I got to check out that comic as well. It seems fun. And it seems like they're also the Sisters of Star, which is cool. Who's, of course, the female vampire in this. The girl vampire. I want to say female. It makes me sound like I'm a Ferengi. But you know what I mean. Ferengis hate root beer. So the grandpa could also fight them because he loves root beer. And that's the main thing I was going to get to, is that if I was approached and they said, "Hey, Elijah, we want you to make a Lost Boys spin-off piece of media, a film, a comic, a book, whatever. I'm gonna do the story of Grandpa. I want to know what Grandpa's deal is. I'm gonna do the Grandpa prequel. How does this guy, who's an old man in the 80s, who lives in this town full of vampires and is not just aware of vampires, but has a fucking truck built to kill vampires with, but also has, like, presumably had a wife, has kids, has grandkids. What is this guy's deal? And I think that's such an underused concept. I want to see how this guy became who he is, because he's incredibly casual about it. It seems like he's at a point in his life where he's just probably killed so many vampires that he doesn't even break a sweat. He's just, yeah, I need a root beer after doing it, but I mean, who gives a shit? The one problem with this town was all the damn vampires. So he's known about them forever, seemingly. And, you know, he's got that truck. He's probably been killing them for years. So I like to think that the reason that the reason that everyone in this town is still alive is the grandpa, right? It's still the murder capital, but it's just because he hasn't caught all the vampires yet. And I love the idea of just an old, a root beer swigging, vampire hunting old man with like a wife and kids, at some point in his life, just driving around California in his truck, just killing vamps. God, make that movie. Make that, because they're apparently going to do another Lost Boys movie. Make that it. It's not what it's going to be. It's just going to be a remake or a follow-up to the Lost Boys. The thing about that is that, like, so I hate to say it, a significant amount of the cast of this film just are not going to be able to come back. I mean, some of them can. Jason Patric, obviously, who's the lead, he's still alive. He still, is an actor, presumably. He's still in stuff. He's in the he's going to be in the MK Ultra movie, or he's in the MK Ultra movie. He's in Wayward Pines. He definitely is still around and doing stuff. So yeah, he can come back. That'd be cool, actually. They could make the main characters his kids or something like that. He could be the grandpa character now. That'd be cool. Maybe you can, headcanon it or something that maybe he retains some elements of his vampire abilities. There was an unmade pilot for an unaired pilot for a Lost Boys TV show on the CW, which, thank fucking God that didn't happen. Jesus. I'm not a CW fan. Especially 2019 CW. Oh, boy, that would be bad. It was not a sequel. It was just a remake. Yeah, I didn't want that. I mean, and also a lot of people will joke about how he looks a lot like Billy from Stranger Things. They're not similar particularly as characters. This guy's a lot nicer than Billy. But they look alike, and they kind of dress alike. They got similar vibes. Yeah, if they did a Lost Boys remake, don't make it Riverdale or like the Vampire Diaries. Make it a little bit more like Stranger Things, which I hate that kind of 80s nostalgia shit we're on right now, and I think it's slightly dying away at this point because people got kind of sick of it. Other than Stranger Things, honestly, yeah, just do it with the Lost Boys. It's fine. It doesn't even have to be set in the 80s, but just make it a show or a movie where you've got kid characters and teen characters and adult characters, and they're all kind of dealing with different things, but they're all kind of the same thing. And it's not so much a teen drama as it is just an actual horror thing. I think that would be great, because that's basically what this is. And just do that again. Yeah, and then another thing about this movie I should note. This movie has a great soundtrack. This has a soundtrack. It's got an original score that's really cool. It's like an orchestral organ thing. They frequently use a cover of "People Are Strange" by The Doors, which is by the band Echo and the Bunnymen, who are a band from the 70s and 80s. And yeah, they have a cover of "People Are Strange." There's a lot of actually homages and references and stuff to The Doors with this. There's also at one point one of the characters has a Jim Morrison poster. I forget who has it, but there is a Jim Morrison poster in this film. Obviously they use that. Yeah, and then the guy, so I guess the sexy sax man himself does a song on the soundtrack. He does a cover of "I Still Believe" by the Culls. What else do we got here? There's an In Excess song on here. There's a song by Foreigner. And then the theme song. Boy, we got to talk about the theme song. "Cry Little Sister" by Gerard McMahon. This thing is just it's so insane, man. What a crazy song. There's some cheese in this movie, and it's mostly through that. Man, is it, I wish I could just play it, but I can't because it's copyrighted. But man, is it insane. All of the songs in this are insane. It's got basically throughout it, it's this weird, like it's obviously a very sexual song, but it's all talking about brother and sister, and it clearly doesn't mean it like that, but it's hard not to think of that. And it's got like a choir of children going, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not die," and it's like, whoa, and it's got like religious themes. It's just the most 1987 thing I've ever heard. It's sick. And they use it constantly in the film, like just all the time. It's always being used. Oh man, it's fun. It's aged poorly, but in like a fun way, not like an embarrassing kind of way. Yeah, and I think that this film is very easily slots into just this is a classic of like kind of urban fantasy. And it's an easy movie to just imagine it's taking place in the same universe as whatever other vampire thing you like. This could be in the universe of Buffy. This could be happening in obviously like a Dracula-derived universe. The lore of vampires is a little different, but that's not an issue. Again, just really quickly, when I talk about Anno-Dracula, that's the thing I'll talk about, is how Kim Newman reconciles different vampire abilities and races and sort of subtypes of vampires. And obviously also Vampire the Masquerade does that. So, yeah, I mean, vampires don't have to be consistent even within the universe. You just kind of have to have an explanation for why they aren't. Because Dracula, seemingly, in the original book, Dracula has powers the other vampires don't. And it's only sort of alluded to why, although it is explained in the book. For those who don't know, Dracula is apparently a graduate of a school called the Scholomance, which is a school for witchcraft, dark magic, seemingly owned by the devil, which means that it's fun to think that Dracula was a wizard before he was a vampire. But regardless, that's not in this movie. Dracula's not in this movie at all. Yeah, I mean, this is just a really fun, solid film. It's just fun to watch. It's not very long. It's not very long at all. And it's, this is a movie that you can enjoy even if you're not a vampire person. Obviously, like my mom. Yeah, unlike with Darkman, I don't have a whole lot to, I don't think I have a whole lot to say about it, unfortunately. But it is really a really fun movie. Fun thing about this movie also that I forgot to mention is there's a Munsters reference. They refer to the little boy vampire as Eddie Munster at one point. He does kind of look like Eddie Munster, so it works. Also, speaking of the Munsters, I've been laughing to myself for the last couple of days. Because I had the thought of, obviously, the Addams Family and the Munsters were always sort of dueling franchises. They've both had a new interpretation recently because both of Wednesday, but also the Rob Zombie Munsters. And obviously, those are very different works, but I was laughing to myself about the notion of doing like a Wednesday style like Munsters show, but it's called Eddie, and it's about Eddie Munster. And they try to like make Eddie Munster like a fun like goth icon in the way that they made like Jenna Ortega's Wednesday one. And it's like, kind of a comedy, but there's like it's like a teen comedy, and I was just laughing to myself about that because like it's not really any more ridiculous than what they did with Wednesday, to be fair. But it's just funny to imagine though, like them trying to make the Munsters like cool and sexy. I mean, they did do that at one point. And there's like a pilot from a few years ago with a bunch of people, like I think Portia de Rosie's in it, and Jerry O'Connell, I think, is in it. It's like a dark reboot of the Munsters. I'm going to do that as an episode, actually. I don't even know where to find it, but I'm going to do it. I've never seen the whole thing, but I want to because it seems like it would be really funny to talk about, where they try to do like a serious drama take, like edgy drama take on the Munsters. Ugh. Amazing. Another thing to note about The Lost Boys is just how much money it made. This movie made a lot of money. It didn't cost a lot of money, seemingly. It was like an $8 million movie, something like that. It made like 36. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it was something like that. This movie was really successful, which is why it's surprising that the sequels came out in the early 2000s and they're like direct to DVD. Like this could have, if it was made in a kind of different climate of film. Like if it was made today, this movie would have had 8 sequels and a spin-off TV show, and they would have tried to make it a cinematic universe, and I hate that. The 80s, they knew, well, I was going to say they knew how to do it, but I do wish we had more Lost Boys stuff. Yeah, no, this is a really fun movie, and I'd love to see more stuff in this universe. I should note that the Lost Boys characters have made unofficial cameos in other pieces of media. Just on Wikipedia alone, they mention there's a novel by a woman named Jenny Colgan. I don't know anything about this author, but she wrote a book that has the Frog Brothers in it as as characters, and it's like an unofficial cameo. Okay, no. So I guess Jenny Colgan is she wrote for Doctor Who, the Doctor Who books, which is cool. That makes sense. So yeah, apparently she also wrote this book called. She actually wrote for the. Not important, but it seems like she also wrote for the show of Doctor Who. But I don't know. Oh no, I'm misinformed. I'm on Wikipedia. She wrote a novelization of The Christmas Invasion, which is an episode, a David Tennant Doctor Who episode. But she wrote a novelization much later. Regardless, still cool. And it's cool that she put the Frog Brothers in a book unofficially. And I think that, yeah, adult Frog Brothers grown up is a cool idea as well. What do these guys end up doing? Seemingly they become vampire hunters according to that comic. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. But I also think that because none of that got produced, it's a little bit fun because it means that we as fans get to speculate all that stuff ourselves. And that's great. I think that there's an element of just fan speculation that I like. I was talking to my friend about this. There's certain questions that you don't want answered in the actual media itself. Like, it's fun to speculate what Yoda, what's that species called? What's their deal? How old's Yoda? What's the deal with Yaddle? Are there more of them? Are there less of them? What are their powers? Like, what's their connection to Grogu? Most of that stuff with Star Wars, though, it's like, I don't want them to answer that. I don't need young Yoda, the movie. It's funny in concept to do young Yoda. I don't need that, though, right? I can get flashbacks to younger Yoda, but I don't want to see what Yoda's backstory is. And so, yeah, it's a situation of like, yeah, there's some things that are kind of best left unanswered by canonical media that we can speculate for ourselves on. Anyway, this is a fun episode to do. I'm happy to do it. I should know, by the way, that there is going to be a special episode of this coming out soon, very soon actually. As in, I've already recorded it soon. It's coming out on this coming Saturday. And it's about one of my favorite vampire movies, and I was just so excited I had to talk about it sooner rather than later. Don't expect that this is still going to be for now just every Wednesday. But this is a very special episode. Trust me, you're gonna want to check this one out. But yeah, thanks for being here. Listen to me talk about the Lost Boys. I got some more stuff planned, some more fun stuff planned. A lot of which is probably going to be more interesting to talk about. I'm really happy, by the way, just how much people seem to have enjoyed the first episode. It does, it's not doing crazy numbers or anything, but just so many people have told me that they liked it. I'm happy just for any kind of success with it, because it's fun to do. You know what I mean? It's fun to record a podcast. I've meant to do it for years about whatever, but it's fun that I finally found something to do one on. I'm happy that you guys are rocking with it. Hopefully you keep rocking with it with the second episode, and you don't like go, boo, this stinks, or whatever the little SpongeBob Frisch guy. I don't know, guys. This episode should have ended like 3 minutes ago. I'm gonna go.